You won't find it on the kids shows or the movies, heck, not even in the video game reference in Marvel Ultimate Alliance. But Forge and Storm are a thing, and they're pretty doomed from the start, to say the least. But the character work by Chris Claremont shows his perfect understanding of Storm by putting her in a very real deal, I would say, toxic relationship. Now, there are more abusive dynamics in Marvel relationships, but for now, we're gonna talk about the beginning of the Storm Forge romance. And by the end, I hope to discuss whether this relationship will last or is doomed to fail. Even though I just said that they are doomed to fail. But first, who are we talking about today? Storm. You know her, you love her, the weather goddess Aurora Monroe that needs no introduction. Born in Kenya, she learned young that she could control the weather. She's held a Mjolnir type weapon called Stormcaster. She's one of the most iconic X-Men, also bringing diversity to the Marvel landscape. I don't need to tell you who Storm is. We love her. We know Storm. Now, Forge, on the other hand, Forge is what Iron Man wishes he could be. He is a Native American mutant born to the Cheyenne colony, named only the Maker. Not only can he invent things without knowing how he did it, Forge can use magic because he was trained by a man named Naze. Careful how you pronounce that. Forge enlisted in Vietnam War against the will of the Cheyenne. In Nam, he saw his friends killed in combat. So, he did what anyone else would, bring a horde of interdimensional demons. When the demons started to take over, Forge called in a B-52 strike that leaves him with no right arm or right leg. So, a year before Storm meets Forge, she's hanging out with Yukio and goes through her mid-20s punk phase. I say hanging out in quotations because they were supposed to be a lesbian couple, but it's the 80s, so can't do much there. Forge, on the other hand, is working for the Defense Department. He turned down the work for S.H.I.E.L.D. before the war in Nam because he felt like he could help over there, and we all know how that went for him. He is picked up after Tony Stark quits making weapons. I guess only mustache men are allowed to be on the team. Storm is working with an unsure of herself Rogue, wrestling with her abilities and connection to Mystique. Mystique has, say it with me folks, infiltrated the government and learned of an experimental weapon created by Forge that can take powers away. On one hand, it's Rogue. She hates her powers. She cannot gain physical intimacy, and that's important for her social links. On the other hand, she can experience wonderful things like Storm's power. Storm willingly gives up, even though there's a possibility that she becomes a Carol Danvers situation, where Carol ends up in a longer coma and inside Rogue's head. I also love this scene because we're introduced to the way Storm sees the world, and even in her darkest era, she has the permanent love and appreciation for life, it seems like. Suddenly, Rogue gets shot down by an unknown source, but she still has Aurora's power, and the more she uses her powers, the more Storm's psyche enters her head too. Rogue thinks the word shall and creates a hurricane. This leads to some unwanted ship interference, but that's nothing that a return to normal Storm can't fix. On the way back, the feds are ashore waiting for them, and they're holding on to this boat, taking it to shore, and one of them's got that experimental anti-mutant gun, and he's aiming to shoot Rogue, and oop! Shoots Storm down instead. Forge is pissed, knowing of Storm's importance. This comic is so good, although it doesn't have the romance yet. It's so exciting, and Rogue and Storm are always fun to read along with. They get along so well, it doesn't matter what they're going through. But what happens in the next issue? Love during depression. For the first time, the great and mighty Storm faces her darkest chapter, the loss of her powers. No more is she the goddess she used to be. She feels no power and is bedridden in Dallas, the worst place to be bedridden in. Forge tries to get her up, but it's kinda creepy seeing no light in her. Even when she's mad, she has an energy that is so rarely taken away. Forge studying up on her on his hologram he invented probably without knowing in his really cool clear house. He reads up on her circumstances that brought her here. She walks in on it and proclaims that she should have let him drown. Romantic. Later though, they discuss Storm's kinship with Rogue. Storm explains her life being similar to Rogue's. Growing up a crook in Cairo, this of course leads her to reminisce on her powers and how she feels like will never be the same. But Forge doesn't see it that way. I could fly. I was one with all creation, Storm says. And Forge quite coldly says, and now you've got to walk like everyone else. The goddess has become just plain folk. Tough break. Ouch. Forge needs to unwind. After this discussion, he hits his indoor pool, and he's talking about Storm having privilege. He thinks he should check up on Storm, but to his surprise, she jumps in the pool, and after a lap around the pool, she gets out and sees Forge's leg on the poolside. How she didn't see this when she was jumping in is beyond me, but Forge talks about his experience in the war. He talks about wanting to die after his accident. Maybe Forge does understand what she's going through. Maybe both of them might not be content in their lives, but they can be content in each other. Storm gets cold for the first time since her mutation, and Forge is right there with the towel for her. Meanwhile, Rogue accidentally becomes a brood and injures a scientist out of her own volition. Sounds like somebody else I know. Back at Forge's, Storm dresses up and finds herself wanting to impress Forge. She puts on a stylish dress and leaves Forge speechless, both interpreted as an awkward interaction. This leads to my favorite panel so far. When I first read their awkward encounter, I thought they would have bad communication skills, but the next panel, they immediately address it. Forge appreciates his privacy, but doesn't find Aurora imposing. Forge offers Storm her first glass of champagne. Aurora hasn't even drunk before now, and this no hairline icon is getting her to take a sip. She tells the darkest moment of her life, her parents being bombed. To this point, she hasn't told anybody. Storm's ability to not control the weather leaves her feeling helpless. Her emotions were tied up to her powers. She could never let them out. This led to her donning her punk outfit in the first place. She claims that the only person who is affected by her feelings is her, and that's such a scary new feeling for her. Forge responds boldly, not quite, and kisses Aurora. Oh my god. He begins to tell her he might know something about... The phone rings, and it's back to work for Forge. Forge goes upstairs to take the call, and Aurora, with the moment alone, decides it's a good time to call Professor X, but this is a landline phone. She hears Forge's conversation instead, where she hears the scariest news. Forge is talking to the guy who shot her, and admits that Forge created the gun that can take away mutant powers. This obviously enrages Storm, who's holding a remote that controls the glass apartment, and she turns on a holographic image of the bombing that left Forge with one arm. She falls off an edge. She asks the goddess for help, and miraculously, lightning destroys Forge's floor. Aurora contempts jumping off the building. Forge pleads, begs that he's a mutant like her. This isn't enough for Storm. She bared her darkest side of herself, wanted to impress him, but suddenly, she sees how he turned his back on the Cheyenne and now on the mutants. Surely, this habit will continue. She strikes him, calling him pathetic. In a rained out panel, we see Storm tell Forge he's got no identity. And Storm may feel the way she feels now, but she proclaims that she will regain her old self. Well, that was awesome. If Chris Claremont knows one thing, it's how characters need to react to one another.
That's what I'm talking about! That's why he's the MVP! That's why he's the GOAT! The GOAT!
Aurora falling for Forge feels real and satisfying. She's blushing at this man who has no hairline, I might add. This is a sort of relationship we may have been in ourselves. False pretenses, knowing it's a bad idea, but the heart wants what the heart wants. And sometimes you try to force things to work, so hoping that you can weather the storm in this relationship you just forged. Right? The next issue revolves around aliens called Wraith trying to get Forge, blah 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 blah. Storm runs into Forge's old mentor, Naze. That'll be important later in a weird segment. Naze has a dream about Forge's safety, which leads her to reuniting with Forge, but it's all business now. Storm was vulnerable, and now she paid an emotional price for it. She is only here to help out Storm with these Wraiths, with this bug problem he's having. After this, they don't see each other for a few months. Now, I will admit, I skimmed through a lot of this. This is the Follow the Mutant storyline, and seems important, but I was just trying to capture the Forge and Storm relationship here, so I did do a lot of skimming. In an admittedly creepy arc, Storm is hanging out with Naze, getting in tune with her spiritual side. Naze convinces Storm to go on a journey to find Forge and kill him, because Native Americans in comic books are never treated well. From Naze's perspective, Forge is using his Cheyenne power for evil. She hikes deep on a journey in Wyoming that apexes in issue 224 of Uncanny. When Naze kisses her, ew!
You don't want to be like this. This is disgusting. This is awful in every way.
And Storm sees Forge opening up another dimension amongst the hordes of monsters coming out of this Forge wormhole. Storm still shouts her love for Forge as she kills all these demon monsters and makes the summit. She yells Forge's name. Forge is happy to see her. He's dressed in his traditional Cheyenne outfit, almost countering when they were last together. He's accepted himself. Aurora, on the other hand, not so much. She's dressed in a native outfit too, almost like a 30-year-old woman trying to find herself on some Eat, Pray, Love arc. At a later point, she compares her prayers. She was awed by the goddess appearing to her when she was a kid, but now she hears nothing. And that's partially because she's supposed to be the goddess now. Storm stabs Forge, proclaiming that the portal he opened up would have destroyed the world. But she was wrong. Forge says he was closing it, assisting the X-Men. Issue 226. Storm aids Forge. Storm discusses her false trusting of Naze. Forge still is healing from a stab wound, asks for Storm to stay, in which she responds, "I'll be nearby," but he asks her again to stay. Like I said earlier, I'm skipping around a bit. Follow me in the storylines, and I think they're not on Earth, they're on a counter-Earth. Storm remarks during the scene about other Earth being home, in which Forge responds, "Isn't home where the heart is? Mine's with you. Where's yours?" To which Aurora says, "I cannot say." Storm and Forge reunite at his cabin later, which she's pretty impressed by. He probably doesn't even remember making it when they share their second kiss. Put a hold on that. Meanwhile, in Dallas, it's like Cowboys versus Indians with the X-Men in the middle. I don't know. I don't really. Storm and Forge, they find a peaceful place in Wyoming where they could ideally live out their love at the expense of whatever's going on in Dallas. Forge, of course, has made a portal back because that's just what he does. On top of that, he's got another device that might give Storm her powers back. He used parts of his robotic leg to build it. He's not 100% sure if it'll work, but Forge says that all his heart wants to do is take her home and start a life together. But he and Storm both know that she wouldn't respect that. Forge shoots her and nothing. Forge says essentially to give it a sec, but Storm now fears she'll be as privileged as she was when she met Forge. After this, they exchange a second kiss, and suddenly, lightning returns. The two are overwhelmed with joy and teleport themselves back. This issue was the first time we got Storm and Forge content and it's definitely a bit more rushed to get Storm's power back. I imagine Storm needed to get her powers back, but at the cost of what I feel are too quickly of kisses from a couple that just doesn't trust each other and are not on a national progression of that second kiss. Like, imagine if their second kiss was after Forge tried to restore her powers. Wouldn't that convey to the message almost that their love helped bring Storm back? Instead, they just waited like 2 minutes. I'm gonna rush over 227 because there's not a whole lot of romance, and that's all I care about here. Forge seemingly kills all the X-Men to stop the demon alien creature invasion that's associated with the Cheyenne. Okay, maybe I skimmed over a lot. Dang, I don't realize this. And you know the drill. They're not going to see each other for a while. Alright, with all this info, can they work things out? Well, we do know the answer to that, but we'll discuss the fate of their relationship later. Now, with these pretenses of their relationship, are they building a strong relationship? No! Storm and Forge always find themselves in two separate stages in their life. They are doomed. I mentioned this earlier, but Forge is a man hiding from his own identity and seemingly thinks helping Storm will make things right. Meanwhile, Storm just entered the most depressed moment in her life, and it was caused by Forge. Then she's out kissing his shaman like that'll make it any better, culturally appropriating the natives. I don't care if he's a Cheyenne god who gave her his blessing. Imagine if the roles were reversed. This all accumulates in their one shot of being happy, but it's at the expense of their homeworld of Dallas. Honestly, just live in the cabin at that point. We don't really need Dallas. Dallas is whack. I'm more of a Houston guy. But yeah, honestly, just live in the cabin in the woods. That's usually an X-Men origin story. And we're gonna stop right here. That's part 1. There's not a lot of official reading orders I could find online about the Storm and Forge relationship, but I'd love to explore it further, so please comment down below if you know any. Again, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it romantic. I hope you're watching this with your partner that you're hiding that you took her powers away from her. I hope this can help you open up that discussion. I hope that I hope your girlfriend's not severely depressed. Alex, what do you hope for? What do you hope for? Alex hopes he passes this test.